Welcome, ghouls. This is our 12th episode of the Shrouded in Darkness podcast, and I'm your true crime obsessed host, Marlena. Today, we're going to skip the disclosure and jump straight into the story. It's a crazy one and a long one. We're going to be diving into the story of the Sodder Children. Per usual, let's start with some background information. George Sodder was born in Italy in 1895. He traveled to the United States at the age of 13. The reasons for leaving his home have never really been known. His work experience began with the Pennsylvania railroads. Then he became a truck driver in Smithers, West Virginia. This is what would lead George to starting his very own trucking company. He would eventually meet Jenny Capriani, another Italian that immigrated to the U.S. at an early age. The two would marry and settle in an Italian-populated town near Fayetteville, still in West Virginia. Together, they had 10 children between the years 1923 and 1943. At the time of the incident, the children were as following: John, 23, Marion, 17, George Jr., 16, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louise, 9, Jenny, 8, Betty, 5, and Sylvia, 2. There was one other son, Joseph, but he was away in the army. Now, let's dig a little deeper into this case. It was Christmas Eve, 1945. The Sodder family enjoyed a day of fun and family festivities. It was late in the evening, nearing 10 p.m., when 3 of the girls, Martha, Jenny, and Betty, begged their mother to stay up later so they could continue playing with their new toys. Maurice and Louise were still awake as well. Mr. Sodder, John, and George Jr. were all fast asleep in their beds. Miss Sodder agrees to let the little ones stay up a little longer, as Marion was also with them. She instructed the boys to check the animals before bed and then went on her way with Sylvia in her arms. A telephone call rang through at midnight, so Miss Sodder rushed downstairs to answer. But the person on the other end was unrecognizable and appeared to have the wrong number. Before returning to her room, Miss Sodder noticed the downstairs lights were still on and the curtains open, but everyone appeared to have gone to their rooms except Marion, who was asleep on the sofa. So she switched everything off and drew the curtains closed and returned to bed. She had barely drifted back to sleep when she was awakened again. This time by the sound of something hitting the roof of the house, a loud bang followed by something rolling. She dismissed the noise, desperate for sleep. Less than an hour passes when Miss Sodder wakes up to the smell of smoke. She jumps out of bed to see George's office on fire. She quickly woke her husband, who in turn woke the 2 oldest sons, John and George Jr., since they were nearest the room. The 4 of them, along with Marion and Sylvia, were able to get out of the house. From outside, they shouted to the other children that were believed to be asleep on the upper floor in their rooms. There were no responses. All efforts seemed hopeless. The stairs were engulfed in flames, and the phone lines were unresponsive, even in the neighbors' homes and nearby businesses. There was nothing. Even the ladder was missing from its usual spot. George attempted to pull his work trucks toward the house to help reach the upstairs window, but neither of them would crank. With no other option, the 6 Sodders stood there, helplessly watching the house burn over the next 45 minutes. Eventually, a neighbor is able to reach the fire department by driving into town and finding the fire chief. Only they don't show up until 8 a.m., which was hours after the fire had started. Another 2 hours later, the firefighters report that there were no bones amongst the rubble. It was hard to believe considering there were 5 children left in the home. The final ruling was that the fire was caused by faulty wiring, and the heat was so severe that the bodies simply burned completely. The family was instructed to leave the site undisturbed so that the state fire marshal could conduct a more thorough investigation. But after 4 long days of waiting and nothing happening, they couldn't handle seeing the rubble anymore. George bulldozed the area with the intent to convert it to a memorial garden for their lost children. The family continued searching and praying for answers, hoping there was still a chance that their 5 children would be found alive. There were leads and tips, but nothing that could prove anything definitively. The family even put up a billboard and offered a reward, but no answers were ever found. The family would eventually have funerals for their supposedly deceased children. And sometime after those funerals, the family started questioning the entire event. The fire was supposedly caused by faulty wiring, which would lead one to think the power would go out. Yet the family's Christmas lights remained on the entire time. The missing ladder was later found at the bottom of an embankment 75 feet from where it was supposed to be. Remember how the phone lines were unresponsive? So it was believed maybe the fire caused a disruption. However, a repairman was able to determine that the lines were actually cut on the pole, which was 14 feet high. It's assumed that the fire's heat was so hot that it burned the entire skeletal remains of 5 people, yet appliances were still intact. Miss Sodder did some more research on her own. She spoke to a local crematorium and even experimented by burning animal bones. Her findings were always the same. There should have been some evidence of her children if they had actually died in the fire that night. There are some theories and speculations about what could have happened, which really isn't a surprise considering how bizarre all this already sounds. Some people believe that the fire was deliberately started by someone. A bus driver claimed to see people throwing balls of fire at the Sodder house that same night. Months after the fire, Sylvia, which I believe was a 2-year-old, found a small rubber ball-like item in the nearby brush, which could possibly support what the driver saw. George thought he thought the whole thing was maybe by a pineapple bomb, which was similar to what we would use during combat. This theory goes along with the strange noises that Miss Sodder heard that night. Remember how she heard something hit the roof and then start rolling? Most people believe that the Sodder children were still alive. There were a few tips that actually supported this. One observer of the fire stated she saw some of the children in a vehicle peering out the window while they were driving by their house. A waitress said she served those same 5 children breakfast the morning after the fire. She was at a truck stop between Fayetteville and Charleston. Someone that ran a Charleston hotel claimed to have seen the children a week or so after the fire. They were with 2 men and 2 women, all of which appeared to be Italian. There was one strong piece of evidence that came from a photograph postmarked from Kentucky. The picture showed a man around the age of 30 that resembled Louis Sodder. Despite their efforts, though, nothing more could be found about this. Many of the Fayetteville residents believed the Sicilian Mafia was to blame. Apparently, George Sodder was anti-Mussolini, and it's thought that the Mafia was trying to extort money, and the fire was just part of their plan. In August of 1949, so almost 4 years after the fire, George Sodder persuaded a pathologist to supervise a new search of the grounds. This resulted in the unearthing of human remains. After thoroughly studying the findings, the remains appeared to belong to someone aged 16 to 22. But the oldest missing Sodder child was only 14 years old at the time of the fire. In addition, the bones showed no sign of fire exposure. So once again, this led to no new helpful information. As if the theories aren't interesting enough, I did find a few other things I wanted to share. On multiple occasions prior to the incident, George was warned about the possibility of a house fire. An insurance salesman was one that made such accusations, even stating that his children were going to be destroyed. This same man also disagreed with George's opinion of Mussolini. Another person that did some work in the Sodder home mentioned issues with the fuse boxes. George wasn't worried at either time because they had never had any electrical issues. Plus, the local power company had recently checked everything and deemed the home safe. Yet, there was suddenly faulty wiring that caused the fire. In the weeks leading up to the fire, some of the older Sodder children noticed an unrecognizable car, watching the younger Sodder children as they returned home from school. One final super interesting fact. The Sodders hired a private investigator, and through him, they learned that same insurance salesman that said his children would be destroyed in a house fire also served on the jury that deemed the fire accidental. I don't feel like that could be a coincidence. Gosh, this story is a difficult one to take in. It's heartbreaking to think that the surviving family members never got any answers. Nothing real. They never knew what really happened that night. It certainly wasn't for lack of trying. They personally chased down every lead, every photograph, every possibility. Looking at all the events of that night, the missing ladder, the cut phone lines, the disabled trucks, individually, I could believe the odd coincidences, but all of those things happening together, causing such an awful sequence of events, I don't understand how all of it wouldn't have been looked at as suspect. I mean, those are some major red flags. One also has to wonder about the 5 specific children that were missing. They all shared an area on the most upper floor of the house. They were also the last ones to go to sleep. Aside from Marion, of course, who was on the sofa. Is that just another coincidence? It's been 80 years since that Christmas Eve fire, and we are no closer to finding the truth. If nothing else, I pray the Sodders can at least be together wherever they are now. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this case. There's so many holes, so many questions. Have you done any research yourself? Do you have any details that I didn't cover? Let us hear from you. You can find us online with Instagram and WordPress under Shrouded in Darkness Podcast. 2 more things. As always, I will share my resources for the research. Today's information for this case, it came from the Smithsonian Magazine, Wikipedia, All That's Interesting, and Investigation Discovery. Lastly, I want to add something about this case and this family. I share this after reading an article on the Daily Mail, where a descendant of the Sodder family provided a rare interview. It's not something she liked to do. But at the end of the day, the cases we share are real cases, where families are affected and have had to deal with tragedy that occurred. The Sodder family is no different. As is often in cases, rumors become such a big part. Rumors that are in no way valid. The Sodder family was a good family. There wasn't abuse. There's no indication the children deliberately ran away, or maybe someone in the family set the fire. Just don't believe everything you read online. Evil isn't only seen in serial killers. Bear that in mind when you do your own research on any case. I appreciate you tuning in today. You can catch next week's show about the murder or the odd case of Mark Brunel. Until next time, ghouls.